Good afternoon and welcome to the first Lakeside Heritage Society Sunday seminar of the season. And while it's Lakeside's 151st season, Gretchen just told me that LHS has done these for 40 years, not every week, but so it's a long history of presentations. So we're glad that you're here today, and I'm Kathy Veneman. I'm the president of the board at this time, and I'd like to introduce our new archivist, Melissa Ladd. Melissa spent time on Put-in-Bay, then she came over to Catawba and she graduated from Port Clinton High School. She went to the College of Worcester. Then she's been in AmeriCorps for a year, and she was in the Peace Corps for 2 years in Africa. And then she came back and went to grad school at Bowling Green, and has a master's in art history and a certificate in public history. So she's returning to her roots in Catawba. Her parents live in Catawba, so we're glad to have her here. And this is her first seminar, and so we welcome her to our seminar and to Lakeside. Okay, we had a PowerPoint, but we're just getting started. Next week we'll have a PowerPoint running when you all come in, but so you'll have to listen to me for a few minutes with some of our announcements. We like to cooperate with other people, and I just want to let you know that some of you may know Reverend Chris Young, and she is using the archives as a space because it's often hard to find a space for a program. And she's doing a book study this coming Tuesday, the 18th, from 3 to 4:30, and it's called The Girl with Special Shoes. And it's about a person from Cameroon, Africa. And so anyway, anybody's welcome to come to the archives from 3 to 4:30 for that. Tuesday. And then Wednesday at 3:30, we start our first history of Chautauqua movement, beginnings of Chautauqua, and history of Lakeside. And Gretchen Curtis will be presenting the first one, and then Bill Carlson joins her in July. They take turns after a while doing that. So that's 3:30 Wednesday in Egler. So that's the first one of those. And then Gretchen loves to find things to do. So she found a fun thing to do for herself and that will benefit any family members that you have that are age 4 to 7. She's doing a nature program with kids Friday morning at 9 o'clock. And if you know Gretchen, that's a challenge for her to be up moving at 9. She's more likely to do something at 9 at night. But so she's going to do that in the Egler room, and this week it's on spiders and insects. So that's at 9 o'clock on Friday. If you've not picked up or you didn't get in those of you that are members received this information in our spring newsletter, but we do have a brochure out back with all the summer programs. It's in the entryway. And so check out all the things that we're doing. And one of the things that we're doing that you may have heard about is our pop-up candy counter. And it's a fundraiser in honor of the shade tree because we still have the shade tree candy cabinets and so candy counters. And so we're using 2 of those right now to sell candy. And please come and buy some because every time I go in there, I'm buying more and more. And so somebody else's credit card needs to show some candy sales on there, but it's very good. And if you haven't renewed your membership or you are not a member of Lakeside Heritage Society, again, we have brochures or membership forms out as you come in, and we'd be glad to have you join us as an official member so you get our email and newsletter information. And there are lots of other things going on, but you wouldn't remember it, so just get a brochure. One other thing that, yeah. Oh, okay. Okay, on July 21st, we're having a special event called Heritage Day in front of the archives on 210 Walnut. And there's going to be cake and ice cream, there's going to be some bingo playing, but one of the things is that our resident auctioneer, Steve, an antique expert, Steve B. Miller, who lives on Oak, is going to, it's a verbal assessment. If you bring in an item and say, what's this worth? He will, it's our own version of Antiques Roadshow, but we can't use that name. So he's going to do that during that afternoon. So if you're going home and you want to bring back something that you wonder how much, what it is and how much it's worth, Steve will help us out. Yeah. Okay, up to 4 items. Yeah, and there's a $5 donation fee. This is a fundraiser, remember. So, but anyway, it should be a fun day on the 21st, and you'll hear more about that. And we'll get that into our rotating announcements. Also, we had a great Memorial Day weekend sale. As you know, that's our big fundraiser. And this year we brought in over $30,000 again. It's unbelievable that we all have so many things that we would like to recycle. So it's a lot of work, but we haven't given up, and so there will be one Labor Day weekend. So if you already have items that you know you want to donate, Nancy Jacob is handling that since Rich is flying out around the world in Europe or something. So Nancy Jacob is taking those phone calls, and you can look her up in the directory or you can check with us at the archives about that. As we all know, Lakeside is about the place, but it's also about the people. And I just want to share with you and ask you to keep in your thoughts and prayers one of our board members, Cindy Knapp. She has a place on, what's your street? Lynn, a summer solstice. But unfortunately on Friday, she received a call from the Alliance Police to tell her that her condo was on fire. And so Jim Hikes is keeping in touch with her. We will find a way to respond to help her when we know more what she needs. But at this point, it's good she was here with her phone and the clothes on her back at least. So keep Cindy Knapp in your thoughts and prayers. She does yoga. She just had knee surgery. She helps us weed at the museum in Caldwell House, and she's one of our Wednesday walk around downtown tour guides. So we are sorry that this has happened, but we know we're a caring community, and we will reach out to Cindy as appropriate. Okay, at this time, I'd like to move into our seminar. Each summer we get some volunteers who decide they'd like to present, and then other times we twist a few arms to get people to help us. And if you happen to mention a topic, Gretchen and other people will remember. So this is a case where the topic was mentioned, and so we're glad to have our presenter today. He's a Lakesider that many of you know, maybe in other contexts. He's been on the board. He's worked with Municipal Services Committee, so he's done a lot around Lakeside. But he also, professionally, he's a radiologist and still active with that, and so he'll tell you perhaps more about that. But his Lakeside history, his grandfather, Dr. K.S. Leary, was a Methodist minister in the West Ohio Conference, and they've owned a Ross Cottage at 216 Plum since 1941. And his first visit to Lakeside was when he was 2 months old. And the Erie Lodge is now owned by he and his wife, Trish. So we're glad to have Terry here to talk with us with his presentation that's officially called Ohio's Other Chautauqua, The History of Miami Valley. So we welcome Dr. Terry Tomlinson.
Thank you, Kathy. Welcome, everybody. We did call this Ohio's Other Chautauquas. There probably are some other small ones. This is probably the only one that's very active still, and we'll explain that as we move forward. But how I got involved or had the idea that this would be a good topic for here was, I'm not sure how many years ago it was. It was quite a few years ago, and it might be as many as 10. I was coming back from Cincinnati on I-75. You'll recognize coming through the Google Maps there right through the middle. And right up in here is where I'm heading, to the southern Dayton suburbs. And I have my navigation system on, and as I'm driving along here, I happened to look down at it and saw something that said Chautauqua. I'm like, who has a Chautauqua around here? And it was spelled properly, so it's like, it's got to be have something to do with real Chautauqua. And you can see on your nav and whatever, it just looks like it's a small town. So I wanted to look into what that was all about. And of course, when I got home, Googled it and checked into it and realized that there had been an active Chautauqua very similar to Lakeside, or started off very similar to Lakeside many years ago, and was still present there along the Great Miami River, just south of the Dayton area, near Middletown. Franklin's down here, and Middletown's over in this area. And we have some, I guess we have some Miami Valley people here. I'm going to start off with a brief introduction to Chautauqua. I know most people in here that come to these lectures probably already have been exposed to this sort of thing, but if you haven't, we're going to do one brief explanation just in case you're new and happen to stop into the Heritage Society lecture. We'll do a quick plug while we're talking about this. You can get a lot of information out of the book from the Heritage Society, and that's where I got a lot of it. I also learned a lot from Gretchen's class that they were talking about that she's going to give. I've been to that class, and of course you'll hear the history of Chautauqua a lot at Lakeside if you're here long enough. But this book is fantastic. Excellent history and pictures of Lakeside, so if you don't already have one, get one. Okay, so Chautauquas generally started out, or many of them started out as Methodist camp meetings that evolved to follow the Chautauqua movement. And in some of those camp meetings, you can see Lakeside's camp meeting was before the Chautauqua Literary and Scientific Circle met, and it was at about the same time when the Chautauqua Lake Sunday School Assembly was meeting in 1874 in Chautauqua, New York. You know, the biggest Chautauqua, and they developed the Chautauqua Literary and Scientific Circle, and it was generally, and I have listed there the Sunday School Assembly. It was generally to teach teachers, and but anyone could get involved, and this still exists. The Chautauqua Literary and Scientific Circle that I have listed there, you can read along with them the books that they want you to read for that year, and you can actually become a member or become certified by them. I'm not sure exactly how they term it. So that still exists if you're interested, but that was part of the beginning of this. They wanted to educate people and educate teachers in broad areas, and eventually this developed into these 4 pillars that we of Chautauqua that we espouse here and that we live here, the arts, education, religion, and recreation that you're all familiar with. The Lakeside Camp Meeting, as I said, started in 1874. The Miami Valley Chautauqua had their first revival in 1896 in Franklin, Ohio. And then these developed into Chautauquas, as I'll describe, but by 1904, there were 150 independent Chautauquas, in addition, there were several dozen of these traveling big top shows that I've got depicted on one of those pictures over there. The founders of Chautauqua, and this is Chautauqua Institution a long time ago, but were Lewis Miller here and Bishop John Hyle Vincent, who had a lot to do, or helped get Lakeside started as well, and certainly visited here several times. So they had a camp meeting in Franklin, and it was run by the Reverend Thomas Harris of Rochester, Massachusetts. And that was way back in July of 1896. And generally, that assembly, that camp meeting, was religious services as the camp meeting started off. But on July 22nd, they had GAR Day. Does anybody know what GAR probably is? It's the Grand Army of the Republic. So this wasn't that long after the Civil War, and they still had a lot of reverence for those who had fought in the war. And Grand Army of the Republic Day, they had some generals speak. General Gordon, John Gordon, on the left there is a Confederate general spoke. And General John Thayer spoke as well. But anyway, that was a big hit outside of the assembly. People liked that, and so the next year they decided to kind of continue that sort of thing and maybe add some more wide-ranging speakers and topics. So in 1897, this Reverend E.A. Harper ran the assembly that year, and of course they still had kind of camp meeting type stuff for quite a bit of it, but they had quite a few more speakers. DeWitt Talmage, who was from the Brooklyn Tabernacle in New York. They had GAR Day again because that was such a big hit. Bishop Vincent actually was here to speak, and they often had politicians. Congressman Paul Sorg was here. And they termed it a galaxy of outstanding talent, but given that could get kind of expensive, and we'll talk about what happens related to that, because Chautauquas often have difficulty relating to money and finance. The assembly program was considered to be first rate, and this was an auspicious start, but the high costs would tend to price out the rural population, and there was some concern about that. Once they got this going, it cost about $1.50 for the season and 25 cents a day. You could get tents for $3 for 18 days, and meals cost 2 bits, 25 cents. So. But they organized, in order to make this program run more smoothly and become a more permanent thing, they organized the Miami Valley Chautauqua Company. And I'll talk as we go along about how this parallels Lakeside. I mean, we had the Lakeside Company at one point and then moved on to an association, and they did the same thing. The general manager of that was F. Gillum Cromer, who was kind of the founder then of the Chautauqua, the Miami Valley Chautauqua. He was a Franklin school superintendent, and I get the impression, I'm pretty sure that it wasn't like today's world in which we have a CEO and a president, and he works for us all year long. These people had jobs, and then they were general manager and ran the Chautauqua in the summer, ran the grounds. Anyway, they had an assembly at the Franklin Fairgrounds, and they had it from 1898 to 1900. Various speakers, some of the most illustrious I put up on the screens, people that you would have heard of. Booker T. Washington there on the left, and William Jennings Bryan on the right. So generally they were successful, and the price of their stock of the Miami Valley Chautauqua Company was rising, so they were drawing some new investors, and they began to consider shopping for a new home. And the reason I talked about being red to black here is they were in a much better financial situation, and that leads you to start shopping, right? So they're shopping for a new home to have an even better Chautauqua. Now, it came down to two locations in the area, and one of them was along the Miami River, at a bend in the Miami River called Vanderveer Grove. The other was called Evans Woodland, and it was kind of more out in the woods between Middletown and Franklin. And there was a little bit of infighting on the board of the company and the stockholders of the company as to where to go, but primarily the infighting was because Dr. F.R. Evans was on the board, and he owned Evans Woodland. So fortunately, with the increased stock price, they had the new investors from, and some of those came from Dayton. The gentleman that I have over here on the right side of the screen was fairly important to Chautauqua, Ohio, and that's E.S. Lorenz, kind of a well-known name in Dayton. He was mostly a music publisher, but I think primarily of hymns and that sort of thing. So. Anyway, his group, and with the money coming in with these other stockholders and whatever, they determined that they wanted to go to Vanderveer Grove. And it was purchased on the Great Miami River, has almost 2 miles of frontage. Of course, the frontage is maybe not as much as the actual, as 2 miles of land north to south, because they're in a bend. So, but it was termed the most beautiful bend in the entire length of the river. And they built a 3-span footbridge that's up there in the left corner. Amazing thing that they built fairly quickly. We take so long to build things now. They built that fairly quickly to get people from the east side of the river over to Chautauqua, Ohio, which is on the west side. And you can see most of the transportation was over on the east side. You can see there's an interurban type train car there. They called it the traction line. They had views of those hills where all of this transportation was. They had railroad. The canal was still over there with the towpaths. And the Dixie Highway was there. Of course, there weren't cars then, but that's where the horse-drawn stuff would come. And they got 1,220 fairly mature trees, or reasonably mature trees, and planted them in the grove. Along the lake, or along the river. And so they ended up with, as Lakeside, with a tented city going, as you see up there in the left corner. And it was a total of about 40 acres. Lots were surveyed and offered to people. By 1904, they had 16 cottages built. By 1908, that had grown to 60 cottages. And they had warranty deeds. Now, a warranty deed cannot have restrictions, but apparently these warranty deeds can have conveyance restrictions, I believe, and that's how they used them to ensure that the cottages, at least at that time when the deeds were being given out, that they only had summer cottages, that people were not living in them all year round. The grounds then, they stated that they were the only ones in Ohio dedicated entirely to Chautauqua. I don't know, I guess it depends on how you define it, but it seems like Lakeside was pretty much dedicated to Chautauqua at that point. And they were a member of the National Chautauqua Alliance. Now, Cromer was the general manager at that point, and he was kind of puritanical, you know, a lot like the very religious Methodists were in those days. And he put some tough rules on the cottagers, and he also ensured that they kept a puritanical Sabbath in the standard way. They had a pretty strong program, and over those years, people like Jane Addams, who was the person who made Hull House, and people probably read about her in school when they were growing up. Governor La Follette from Wisconsin, William Jennings Bryan again, and numerous senators and generals who often were showing up for these things. Now, in March of 1913, those of you who are from the Dayton area are quite aware that we had the most tragic weather event in Ohio history, which is, as it was called, a major flood that devastated the Miami Valley. The pictures that are over there on the right are actually from Dayton, and you know, everything was pretty much underwater. It was pretty disastrous. Took a very long time to recover from that. And actually, the lower picture is from Chautauqua. And when I initially put this together, I thought, well, that's the only picture I have of Chautauqua flooded. But that's actually from a 1959 flood, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. The reason we know that is that the skating rink in the back there was not there in 1913. But you can see from the little map that I showed up there of the Dayton area that multiple rivers come into one place there. And when you have a lot of rain in the spring and the snow melting and whatever, it can get to be quite a bit of water, and a couple of the levees were breached. And down at Chautauqua, they said that the water was spreading out, you know, east to west 4 miles, for 4 miles. So it's pretty disastrous. Of course, they completely lost that footbridge I showed you, and the lower level cottages were swept away. The grove was destroyed that they had brought all those wonderful trees in. They had built a hotel by then called the Grand View Hotel, and it was undermined a bit, although it survived. So it was devastating economically for Dayton, for Chautauqua. And so they had to dig out. They had no assembly in 1913. So just like the history of Lakeside, it's kind of up and down, and it depends on the finances and what's going on in the U.S. at the time. And so the Chautauqua was troubled again because of an outside, well, it was a weather event, nothing that they could control. So they tried to restart the assembly in 1914. They had a 25-day program, and it included Governor Cox, who he was from the Dayton area, and this is him here. And he was basically debating future Governor Willis there on the left, who would beat him in the election. And they actually repeated their, I don't know how long the terms were back there, because they repeated their, maybe 3 years, because they repeated their debate in 1916 at Chautauqua. But again, you know, everybody was digging out, and Chautauqua was kind of low on people's priority lists, so they got into another deficit situation. And they had creditors, lawsuits, judgments, and they even got all the way to bankruptcy hearings. So if this sounds familiar to people who know the history of Lakeside, here we go. And so E.S. Lorenz, who we talked about earlier, arranged a syndicate to satisfy those creditors and to take the property to avoid auction. And in 1915, the assembly was canceled again, but they got to Miami Valley Chautauqua Association. Again, if it sounds familiar to you, we're changing from a company to an association, different group taking over, but able to deal with the creditors because they had new investors and a new plan and a new name. So I talk about recovery here. So 1916 to 1918, they had assemblies. Generally, they were successful. Again, they were now the Miami Valley Chautauqua Association, and that consisted of a board of managers. It was like 5 individuals kind of managing the situation, but they also had a huge board of trustees. And again, everybody knows that Lakeside at one point had a very large board of trustees, very unwieldy. So they had 51 members of the religious community that were the board of trustees. The general manager was a reverend named J. Balmer Showers, and he changed the goals of the association a bit, and they planned continuous operation in the summer with 17-day assemblies, and they managed to achieve that from 1918 to 1927, and that's Reverend Showers there. Now, they held fairly fast to the Chautauqua traditions. As I said, the board was quite unwieldy, and 38 of the members never attended. Anyway, in 1925, they had a resolution to decrease board size, but it didn't pass then, but the idea was there and bound to happen eventually. And again, similar to Lakeside, the cottage owners were asking for more consideration, and they often do here and often did there during this entire time I'll discuss. The general manager was really overwhelmed. I mean, he was having to deal with the finances, with the program, having to keep peace with the cottagers, and manage the grounds. And it was a big job. And as I said, this is a minister who I believe had he was teaching at the seminary in Dayton. It's a seminary called the Bone Break Seminary at that point, but eventually joined with a seminary in Pennsylvania to become the United Theological Seminary, which is still there in Dayton. And his wife was the daughter of Lorenz. But anyway, he was having to deal with all of that, and it became too much for him. So in 26, he resigned, but he stayed around for a year to handle the 27 assembly until they could get someone. A couple of the speakers, notable speakers from then, was a gentleman named Clinton Howard, who was called, quote, a reformer, and Krebs, Stanley Krebs, who's the lower one there, was psychology and salesmanship, probably kind of motivational speaker sort of thing. And the popularity of Chautauqua was decreasing during this period. I don't know, leading up into 1927, what's happening in the U.S., we're kind of in the era of good feelings, Calvin Coolidge kind of stuff, leading into the Depression. And for whatever reason, and maybe because of that, the Roaring '20s, the popularity of Chautauqua was decreasing. Maybe people not looking for the religious underpinnings, not certain. But anyway, it was decreasing. Maybe the fad is decreasing. Anyway, they got the board decreased to, they got some cottage representation in 26, and in 27, the board was decreased to 24, similar to the size of the current Lakeside board. Now, so they were in need of new management, and this gentleman, Wade E. Miller, the Middletown High School principal, came in. He was known as kind of a good manager, a fixer. And there was a revival in interest in Chautauqua, Ohio. He oversaw the a swimming pool being put in. There was a benefactor from Dayton named Holton, and I'm not sure what he did. I couldn't find any information. But he was a benefactor during this period, helped them with the swimming pool, a dining hall, and a coffee shop. They had a hotel named the Hotel Bellevue. It was kind of the hotel and dining room. It burned down when they were trying to renovate it in 1929, so the blowtorch started a fire. And they developed they had their first shelter house in 1930. These shelter houses are just kind of like a picnic covering that they can have meetings in, or multi-purpose area. And they were steadily improving the grounds. The Grandview Hotel had been renovated. Tom Thumb golf, miniature golf, was put in. And they had a full summer season. And some of those things are up there: swimming pool, the Bellevue Hotel, the Grandview Hotel. Now, I term these the salad days, although this period is during the Depression, but they seem to have fairly continued prosperity and growth in spite of the fact that there was depression, and maybe in some ways, Chautauqua is good for that sort of thing. You can either spend money or spend a lot of money, or not spend a lot of money there. A lot of things to do, but you don't have to spend money on them if you don't have it. But the cottages were being occupied all summer at this point, and some of them were beginning to be winterized. I guess they must have changed some of the deed situation. They had a sewer and water project that was primarily came into play because of the Depression. The WPA financed that, or helped to finance that and to complete it. So they had a sewer and water project that helped them quite a bit. There was a Miami Valley Bible Conference that began coming there during this period of time. Getting entertainment was difficult and expensive, and it was partly because radio was beginning to come around. Here in Lakeside, we have that problem with like all of the casinos now. They need entertainment, and a lot of the entertainment right in the zone that we need entertainment, their prices get raised by the casino. And a similar thing was happening to them here with radio. A lot of the people that they'd want to come to speak or perform were getting a better deal with radio and didn't have to travel. So anyway, that was getting to be a little bit difficult and causing some problems. They did numerous improvements. They began to develop a cabin row, a row of cabins for people to stay in rather than tents. And they were making attempts to attract conventions, conferences, and reunions. You can see some of the things there. That up on the left is their auditorium, and that's open air. It's open underneath. Of course, they had a slide into the Miami River. They had a kind of a kiddie land over there down on the left side. And they built some stables that were kind of problematic because the cottage owners didn't like them because they smelled, and there was manure in the streets and on their properties at times, and so that wasn't very popular, at least with the cottage owners. They did some during this period. The grounds really were improved quite a bit under Miller's tutelage. And they improved the auditorium. They built tennis courts, and they actually would skate on their tennis courts, roller skate on their tennis courts in the evening. That was very, very popular. I think people, boy meets girl type of stuff. They had shuffleboard, like Lakeside. They built 2 shelter houses. They had a baseball diamond and a skating rink during this period built. Bowling alleys, you can see over there. They had bowling alleys with, they had grown large enough to need a post office. They built a chapel in the woods similar to what we had. I believe that's it up there on the left. That's a youth group. I'm not sure if that's their chapel in the woods, but they're outside. It may be. 'Cause it says they're worshiping there. They built an administration building, and they did some street improvements, and they had a Sunday school going. So it was kind of a growth time, but there was but even during this growth time, then they spent money on building things, and there was a decrease in interest in Chautauqua. So we're back on that cycle, back on a downward cycle after that period of time. And because the assembly part of it was kind of expensive, the part where you bring in the speakers and the entertainment or whatever was an expensive part, they were kind of decreasing that some. They couldn't spend as much money on it, so Chautauqua was becoming a little bit more of a resort at that point. They had a lot of amenities, but amenities that you paid for by the visit, like your miniature golf and stuff. So but anyway, the annual assembly was a factor in the original charter, so they wanted to continue to have the programming. So they tried to increase cottage assessments from $15 to $25 and give the cottage owners a couple of season tickets. Some of the things some of the people that were visiting during this period of time were Senator Fess, Senator Taft, a gentleman named Billy Sunday, who was a former baseball player that was apparently a real rabble-rouser. I mean, the name of his sermon was Crooks, Corkscrews, Bootleggers, and Whiskey Politicians. They shall not pass. So anyway, that's him over on the right side in his baseball card. But Arthur Compton was a scientist that ended up on the Manhattan Project. And they were now having a full summer season with 43 sources of income. And in the 30s and 40s, the assembly program was waning. They were having like 9 evenings of assembly-type programs, 3 Sunday afternoon lectures, pretty bare bones thing. Eleanor Roosevelt visited. That's her on the program, and then her picture below. Down in the right corner, that's General Hugh Johnson, who was an NRA administrator. That's not the National Rifle Association, National Recovery Act, I think, from the Depression. So, and they tried to do radio programs from Chautauqua in order to increase interest, and so they had a contract with WLW to do radio from there. And Peter Grant's the gentleman up in the right corner. He was a kind of a big star news person for WLW back then. He eventually became Ruth Lyon's sidekick on the 50-50 Club from Cincinnati. Any of you who are familiar with that? But they developed money problems because of the lack of assembly. And then, of course, during the war, it got to the point, one, they lost some money on the WLW deal, but it kind of increased some interest in Chautauqua, and so they actually had record gate receipts, but they lost a couple of $1,000s on the WLW programming. During the war, they had difficulty and had no assembly in 42 and 43, so they began to have some money problems, and the cottage owners were kind of in dissent because they wouldn't have an assembly, but yet they would still have assessments. And that was kind of bothersome to them. So they had a plan to retire the debt in 1944. They had assets of $294,000. They had liabilities of $82,000, and certificates were 2 years past due. So they asked the cottage owners to give $30 per year assessment, $20 per year for 10 years as an extra assessment. Well, the cottage owners were not very happy with that, so they came up with an alternative plan. They had a committee of 9, which included D.W. Mikesell, and he wasn't a big part of Chautauqua, but he interested me because he was a big potato chip king in Dayton, and those are our favorite potato chips because they're local, done in peanut oil, they're really good, and so that interested me that he was at Chautauqua at the time. The Constitution was revised, the association was reorganized under their plan, and the plan was accepted to get rid of the debt. Basically, the cottage owners just put up $100 and then put out new 4% earning certificates for the remainder of the debt, and that gave them complete control of the Chautauqua just by taking control of the debt. And they had 24 board members, and now they had all cottage owners. And Wade Miller was still the general manager, and he was now the superintendent of the Middletown schools. And in 1945, then, they had one of their biggest and best years. And 1946 was their golden jubilee, but again, I'd say that they were kind of getting away from being a Chautauqua, but they still had a significant religious underpinning. After the war, there's not tons and tons of history out there, but they continued along, but much more as a resort than, I think, as a Chautauqua. The stables were remodeled into a community building that still stands today in 54 and 57. They got rid of those stables that they didn't want. Then motorboats started monopolizing the river in the 50s, and the owners didn't like that either, and eventually got them to get rid of those. They had AAU swim meets because they were one of the few Olympic pools in the area. Their programming was rather limited and kind of varied. They tried some summer stock in 1958. They tried various plays over time, but it was hard because plays are kind of expensive. You got to pay the whole cast. You know. It was a little bit difficult, and it wasn't actually that popular. In 66 and 67, they had a Grand Ole Opry show in 66, and that was kind of popular. And so in 67, they did multiple individual shows on Sunday nights with Dolly Parton, Loretta Lynn, Hank Williams Jr., Porter Wagoner, Jerry Lee Lewis. This is Dolly and Porter Wagoner when they were young. Here's the Killer. You heard Mike Cavanaugh play his song last night, one of his songs. Believe it or not, this is Hank Williams Jr., you know, the guy that sings the Monday Night Football song. This is what he looked like back then when he was 16 years old. And Loretta Lynn. Anyway, the University of Dayton had some football camps there. Miami University had some prep programs. It wasn't prep school. It was kind of before you go to school in the fall. I think in the summer, it's almost like a good place where they could kind of teach them how the university was going to work in a camp setting. But there was another flood in 1959, and that caused some more financial problems. Eventually, they had lawsuits trying to call in their loans, and they sold to the Michigan Baptist Fellowship Foundation, or they may have sold. I can't be certain whether it was just Michigan, although that's what Michigan says. It may have been Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana combined, the Baptist Fellowship Foundations. But anyway, in 1968, they sold, and primarily the reason that the board agreed to sell to them was because they were going to continue with something that was kind of Chautauqua-like, religion and camp meetings. And the association continued, the association continued to exist. They had the community center and another building, but that was it. Everything else was sold to the Baptist. And so they continued to have assessments, but it became too expensive for them to deal with their own streets and things over time, and they didn't want to self-govern as a private entity anymore. They wanted the advantages of county and state help, and so they became a town in 1987. I think they probably still have covenants because I think they still have assessments, but they're fairly low. Anyway, so the Baptist years, I run through these very quickly, but it was actually a fairly long time. I mean, this was 32, 45 years. 45 years of continuous camps. So they ran a successful camp, and that's pretty good considering how many times they went cyclical earlier in the Chautauqua years. The camps were successful, mostly for youths. They could have other Baptist camps as well, but it was mostly for youths for 45 years. Many of the buildings were converted, modernized, added during that period of time, but then even in 2013, they ended up on the verge of foreclosure. And when that happened, the Chautauqua was rescued by this man, a guy named Jason Harmeyer. He's the CEO and son of the longtime caretaker during the Baptist years. And his dad asked him to come back and see what he could do to save it. And he started a foundation, raised money, purchased it, and he runs Christian church camps, retreats, and conferences, and has been running them since 2015, I believe. And they're open to corporate events, concerts, banquets. So that's what's there now. And there are 59 buildings. There are 45 acres still. There are 22 amenities. They have zip lines and swings, giant swings, obstacle courses, bungee, a lot of team building stuff because they have a lot of these camps. So, and they call their bungee jump the leap of faith because they're religious there. But they still have a lot of housing capacity. They have the ability to house 700 people in the summer and 500 in the winter. They can feed them. They have a cafe that seats 600. They have 2 huge basketball gyms that they can convert to volleyball and tennis as well, or they can do their dodgeball in there and all of those kind of things. They were having about 20,000 camp kids per year. But then in 2000, they had big problems with COVID, obviously. Or excuse me, in 2020, they had big problems with COVID, and they were down to 2,000 people and had a $1.2 million loss. So they had to kind of close down for a couple of years almost, but they have started back up. And to my eye, looking on their website, it looks like their bookings are fairly full for the summer. The caretaker is still Jerry Harmeyer. He's up there in the right corner. He's Jason's father. He's still the caretaker. And they have about 17 employees. And you can see they still have a nice swimming pool. That on the left, that's a huge gym. And that's a huge dining hall above that. If you want to see what they're doing or what it's like, you can go to their website at www.thecampbytheriver.com. And I'll finish off the slide part of this, or the PowerPoint part of this, with a poetic end. I found an old poem that somebody had written, I guess, while they were at Chautauqua in the summer. And they said, "The maidens are the fairest at Chautauqua. The summer days are rarest at Chautauqua. Friendship is the strongest. Love's light glows the longest as we battle against the wrongest at Chautauqua. Life's burdens seem the lightest at Chautauqua. The campfires burn the brightest at Chautauqua. Plain girls are the fewest. Maidens' eyes are the bluest. Their little hearts are truest at Chautauqua. The sun shines ever brightest at Chautauqua. The breezes whisper lightest at Chautauqua. Gatekeepers are the keenest. The river ain't the cleanest. And mosquitoes are the meanest at Chautauqua." So it was kind of a good start, but kind of ugly there at the end. I don't know. So I'm going to have to switch over real quickly. I wanted to, if I have time, I might show you a quick video. And what I got to do is, I think this will work.
Hi, my name is Jason Harmeyer. I'm the Executive Director here at Chautauqua Camp and Conference Center. And we have been having camp for the last 47 years. We've seen well over 100,000 students come through this property, and we've had about 15,000 put their faith in Christ through the years, and around 7,600 that have committed to full-time ministry. And so we love camp. We love providing a place for students to come and hear the gospel, and also come and be challenged to grow in their faith. You know, what's really exciting is we have this awesome river that literally flows right around our property. We have kayakers and people in canoes that are constantly going right alongside what is now our experiential learning program. And we want to just utilize that. We want to be able to provide opportunities that we've never had before to bring people that are unchurched or unrelated to any Christian organization and invite them on our property and experience something that they've never experienced before. An opportunity to go down a zip line, experience a giant swing, a high ropes course, low ropes course, paintball, but they would experience the message of Jesus Christ. And that is why we exist, to connect people to Christ, connect people to local churches, and connect people to a lifelong ministry that we believe God has called them to do.
The last thing I'm going to do here is show you a few pictures that I took from there. It's not too many. We'll go through them pretty quickly, I think. Come on. Is that not full screen? Oh, shoot. Okay, sorry about that. So this is just the entrance. I don't know who Dayton Impact Field. I don't know what that's their baseball field, but I don't know if somebody plays there that I'm not familiar with. But they do have a baseball field, and this is their new sign and logo type of thing. And you can see they have nice signage. The place looks very well kept. I can tell you that 8 or 10 years ago when I found out about this and I went down there, it was not as nice as this. So they've really done a lot of work and apparently have been doing fairly well. This is the community center. That used to be stables apparently, and somehow they remodeled that into a community center. As I said, that's one of the only buildings that the cottage owners still own, and they do rent that out for, this is what it looks like inside, so they'll rent it out for small dinners or stuff like that. This is, in that picture, in that flood, you saw that curved roof building or whatever. This was the skating rink, apparently. It now looks like that inside, so I think they kind of do programs in there, programming, get-togethers, conferences. They got 1 million chairs and whatever. I think they have a stage back there behind the thing, so very extensive stuff. And this is one of the shelters. We talked about shelters a little bit, open-air things, picnic tables, whatever, the multi-purpose areas. As I said, their gyms and dining areas are huge. This is along the side. I can't even get the picture, a picture of the whole thing in there. This is an area obviously for worship out in the woods or small lectures or programming. Zip lines. Jason showed the zip lines there. That's a big part of their experience. And I don't know, I think once you get far enough away, I can get that whole thing into the frame. That's the, huge buildings with the multi-purpose stuff, big dining hall, big gymnasium. They have disc golf, which my son plays, so that's kind of exciting. This is what the river looks like when you walk down to the edge, at the edge of the Chautauqua. And this is what that cabin row looks like. These things are all, fixed up and ready to take people on. And that's what it looks like from the front of one of them. It kind of reminds me of when I've been at a national park or something and I stay in the cabin. I don't know if they only for camp, because they are loaded for camp every week. So I don't know. They probably would be if they didn't have camp that week. There's the baseball field. They have a couple of buses. I mean, one a fairly modern one there, so they've been able to make some decent purchases. I just want to quickly show Lakesiders some of what their cottages look like. Trish and I were looking at these last night, and we kind of are into architecture and historic preservation, and we're looking at them going, these could be in Lakeside. If somebody showed you these and said, okay, this is a Lakeside property, typical with the gables, and this one with the peaked roof and the fish scale siding up at the top, porches, and the styles are not necessarily defined. Much like Lakeside, it's hard to tell sometimes what you would call it. Colors like you might see in Lakeside, and definitely eclectic. This is it's an unusual place, but then with a stone porch and columns. Some of these places fairly run down and maybe not very well built. I don't know, we were theorizing that might be beadboard on the outside of the house and that plywood up on the top. There was a cottage like that not too long ago over down on 2nd Street that had plywood for the front. This one needs a little help, but looks like it could be interesting if somebody would take care of it. So there were a few that were run down, but most of them looked like people had been living in them and taking care of them. As I said, very eclectic look with porches and very, very different, Victorian touches, just like you'll see in Lakeside occasional. Here's a Victorian touch on my house. So, nice porch, nice lawn. Their streets are similar to Lakeside in that they have the numbered streets. They have numbered streets going one way. The other way they have various names, and they're not trees. So, but I think that's about it. And so I appreciate your listening today. And if you have any questions, I'll answer anything I can answer.
Hi.
Open the chips.
I live just a few miles north of this place, and it's been a long time since I have been there, but I was wondering if you know anything about programming.
What they're doing for programming now? I don't think they have anything like no assembly. I think the programming is entirely related to whatever camp they're having that week. They have some camps that are that they've set up, like that Engage camp or whatever. They've set that up, and then anybody can go to that camp. I think then people sign up and pay to go to that. And then I think they have some other camps where, a youth group is going to be there that week, or whatever. And so, but the programming, I think, is much more just their religious programming and stuff. I don't think they do anything else that I'm aware of. And that's as much as I know. I didn't go interview Jason or anything. I thought about it after, but I just thought it'd be fun to talk to him.
Do you know the number of cottages there? Are they all permanent year-round residents, or some still summer only? And can anyone buy a cottage?
The last one I think I know. I'm fairly certain that anyone can buy a cottage. From looking at them, it looks like most of them are probably lived in all the time. There are a few there, like the one that was falling apart, for example, but there are a few there that may still be summer, but I think most of them have been winterized, but not 100% certain.
Terry, or maybe Gretchen, you had Eleanor Roosevelt was there in 1940. Wasn't Eleanor Roosevelt in Lakeside in 1940 also?
I wouldn't be surprised if she was here, because she was probably on a tour of some sort. Was it the same year, you think, Gretchen? Okay. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough, Terry, for what a enlightening presentation. Do you know by chance if the cottage owners have 99-year leases or if it's fee simple? You mentioned that it's one building that the property owners own of the common areas, but do you know if it's fee simple or lease?
I got the impression, you know, because they said they had these warranty deeds rather than, they weren't called leases. So I think they must own them. And I guess the only reason they even have assessments anymore since they became a town, I think, is because, you know, they have some common areas in the community center. And so I think that's almost like condo association type of thing. I believe they own them outright, but I don't know that for certain. I think now that they're a town, because they're not private anymore. So they can't have, well, yeah, so they can't have 99-year leases. They are a town incorporated, I guess, into the county there.
Any other questions?
Mr. Brucken
Oh,
has a question.
If there's no programming, why do people live there? That is it near, are they a suburb of somebody, or what would be the main attraction for people buying and moving in?
Well, I don't know how many people are buying and moving in. There may be people that have lived there for a very long period of time. I don't know. It's a wonderful place to live in this respect. I mean, it's sitting right on the Miami River. I mean, the houses are just north of the major camp area, or a lot of the houses are. Some of them have wonderful views of the river or whatever. And they're only a few miles south of Miamisburg. I mean, I used to work at Sycamore Hospital, and it's like 10 minutes to Sycamore Hospital. I think it's easier to get there than it is from my house. And so, I mean, you have access to the Dayton area in today's world fairly easily. And so, you know, probably not a bad place to live in that respect. And I'm sure looking at the cottages, you know, some of them are in better repair than others. Probably some of those people have just been there forever and aren't taking that great care of them. But it's in a very interesting place. And it's right behind Pipestone Golf Course, and it's not a bad place to live. I wouldn't
anything
think.
else? Oh, you got one back here?
It's near Franklin. Carlisle's right next to it. There's all kinds of people living in the area anyway.
Since Lakeside was founded earlier by about 20 years or so, did they ever meet with Lakeside to find out what made them tick or successful and get some ideas for their own usage?
I don't know. They said they were part of that Chautauqua Association. That in the histories that I looked at, they said that. So I would imagine that Lakeside probably was as well. Are you aware of that, Gretchen? I don't know. Yeah, okay. Anyway, if they were part of that, then maybe they met and talked. But I am not aware of any. I don't know. I didn't run across it in my studies. I think I saw most things that are available on this. There's not tons of history stuff available there, unless I didn't go to the Chautauqua people themselves and ask them if they had more. It seemed like most of what they had was already kind of printed out there. And I saw a guy that gave a lecture on YouTube, and I'm sure he had access to pretty much what they had, and I thought I pretty much had most of what he had, so.
Okay, we want to thank you, Terry, for your presentation, and if this has been whet your appetite, you can hear more of the history with Gretchen on Wednesday at 3:30 that ties, so go back to the founding. And Susan Mack, who some of you know, has been organizing the collections that we have in the Heritage Society archives on all the different Chautauquas. So Terry, you went and looked at the file. If there were things that you have that we don't have, we hope you'll share them with us so we can add to that file. But we do have files on all the Chautauquas that we know about. And so Susan's working on that. I'd like to, before we thank him, finally, I'd like to make a plug for next week's seminar. They talked about camps. Well, there's a history here of Epworth League and the youth ministry of Lakeside. And so Chris Martin, who is a pastor, will be coming next week at 1:30 to talk about the Epworth League and the history of that, which, for those of you who haven't been around forever, the Ryan Center used to be Epworth Lodge. So, so come and hear that next Sunday. So let's thank Terry again.
Thanks. Thank you.
And thanks to our recording crew. Phil is taping, but also the Lakeside Special Events people and Mike Malakar. Thanks a lot.